The universe's biggest joke? Convincing anyone that freedom meant anything more than a leash, no longer than a politician's promise. And nowhere was this more evident than in Bastion, Earth's orbital answer to overcrowded prisons, and a testament, scratch that, a cruel parody, of what desperation could build. Floating there, a gleaming hunk of metal in the dark canvas of space, it housed Earth's most unwanted souls, a veritable Noah's Ark of societal rejects, minus the salvation. Rigel Vance sat in his cell, a 6x8 box that stank of recycled air and bad decisions. A former engineer with a knack for making things that should explode, he was as cynical as they came. His cell was a testament to bad luck, bad friends, and worse decisions. But hey, at least he had a view of the stars, even if it was through a reinforced glass window that felt like a middle finger to his freedom. "Vance," came a voice over the intercom, crackling with the kind of distortion that made everything sound like it was uttered by a sentient chainsaw. "Visitor for you." "Oh joy," Rigel muttered. "Probably another government stooge wanting to pick my brain about how to build a better mousetrap." Doors hissed open, and in walked Exel Tor, an alien overseer with the charisma of a tax audit. Exel Tor was a Proxian, a race known for their impeccable timing in showing up where they weren't wanted. He looked like someone had taken the worst parts of a squid and a banker, and decided to make it bipedal. His skin was a mottled blue, and his eyes, all 8 of them, blinked asynchronously like a malfunctioning traffic light. "Rigel Vance," Exel Tor intoned, his voice like molasses poured over gravel. "We have much to discuss." "Great," Rigel replied, leaning back in his chair as if he owned the place. "I was just wondering how I'd fill my existential crisis time slot today." Exel Tor's tendrils writhed, an unsettling display of what probably passed for amusement where he came from. "You are aware, of course, of the project we are undertaking here. Let me guess, it's not a retirement village for wayward engineers?" "Indeed," Exel Tor said, stepping further into the cell with a grace that belied his monstrous appearance. "Bastion serves as a testing ground, a crucible, if you will, for the digitization of humanity." Rigel raised an eyebrow. "Digitization of humanity? Sounds like a bad sci-fi movie plot." "Your Earth movies are often more prophetic than you realize," Exel Tor replied smoothly. "We intend to preserve your species in a state of perpetual consciousness. A digital utopia, right, because what I've always wanted is to be a pixelated version of myself stuck in an alien hard drive," Rigel said, sarcasm dripping from his words. "What's next? You gonna upload us all to Spacebook?" Exel Tor ignored the jibe. "The process requires testing. The inmates here will serve as our initial subjects." Rigel laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. "So that's the plan. Turn us into cosmic guinea pigs. I'm sure everyone will line up for a chance at that." "That would be advisable," Exel Tor replied, his tone as flat as stale beer. "Participation is non-negotiable." Rigel's laughter died in his throat. "You can't seriously expect us to just roll over and let you have it." Exel Tor's eyes narrowed, or at least Rigel thought they did. With 8 of them it was hard to be sure which ones were doing the work. "Resistance is futile, as one of your Earth's fictional collectives would say." "That's Borg crap," Rigel shot back, but there was a sinking feeling in his gut that maybe, just maybe, this was one fight he'd have to lose to win. "Consider this an opportunity," Exel Tor continued, unperturbed. "A chance to transcend your mortal limitations." "Transcend? More like disappear into a cosmic filing cabinet." Rigel stood up, his mind racing. "Well, you might think you've got it all figured out, buddy, but let me tell you, humans are a lot tougher than they look. We've got a knack for breaking things, including plans." Exel Tor remained silent, his gaze unyielding. "We shall see. The process begins soon. Prepare yourself." With that, Exel Tor turned and slid out of the cell like an overgrown slug, leaving Rigel alone with his thoughts, which were mostly comprised of colorful metaphors for the alien and a growing sense of impending doom. Rigel paced his cell, his mind a whirlpool of possibilities, none of them good. He had to warn the others, the ragtag bunch of misfits and lowlifes who he'd come to know in this floating purgatory. They might be criminals, but they were his criminals. The cell door opened, a rare occurrence, like finding a fully functioning vending machine on Bastion. In walked Jake, a fellow inmate with the build of a brick wall and the brain of a particularly dim-witted hamster. "Rigel," Jake said, voice low and conspiratorial, which was his usual tone. What's the deal with the squid face? Aliens are planning to digitize us. Turn us into ones and zeros, Rigel replied, watching Jake's brow furrow in a noble battle with comprehension. Like, download us? Jake asked, eyes widening. Yeah, they want to put us in their version of The Sims. Forever. Jake scratched his head. Can't say I'm thrilled about that. Glad we're on the same page, Jake, Rigel said, clapping him on the back. We need a plan. A way to stop them. Any ideas? Jake asked, which was about as close to volunteering as he ever got. Working on it, Rigel said, his mind jumping through hoops like a circus flea. But it involves, shockingly, not being a passive participant in our own extinction. They had to rally the others. The only question was, would they fight? Or would they just line up for their digital lobotomy like good little prisoners? The afternoon dragged on, a slow procession of recycled air and tension thick enough to cut with a blunt spoon. Rigel spent it trying to spread the word, whispering to everyone he trusted, which admittedly wasn't many. As dusk, the artificial version, approached, Rigel found himself in the mess hall, the hub of Bastion's social life. If you could call 36 criminals arguing over stale bread a social life. Rigel stood on a table, raising his voice over the din. Listen up, I've got something to say, and it's not about the lack of decent sandwiches. The room quieted, all eyes on him, except for one guy who was too busy picking his teeth with a fork. The aliens are planning something big, Rigel began, meeting the gaze of every inmate willing to look up from their plates. They're gonna digitize us, upload our minds and toss the rest. A murmur ran through the room, a mix of disbelief and the kind of resignation you'd expect from people already screwed over by life. What's the catch? Someone shouted, a grizzled ex-mercenary with a penchant for asking questions everyone else was too scared to. The catch is we don't get a say in it, Rigel said, letting his words sink in. We can't just sit back and let them strip away the last thing we own, our humanity. What do we do? Asked a voice from the back, the kind of voice that had seen a few too many bad deals go sour. Rigel paused, feeling the weight of their stares. We fight. We use what they've taught us against them. Make it as difficult as possible. Show them that humans don't go down without a fight. Damn right, Jake muttered, drawing a few nods from the crowd. Remember, Rigel continued, we're not just numbers. We're not just data points. We're people, and people can be real bastards when they want to be. The room erupted in a mix of cheers and doubtful grumbles, the kind of chaos that felt like home in Bastion. And as Rigel stepped down from the table, he couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. But as he settled back into his cell that night, staring out at the indifferent stars, one thought nagged at him. If they were going to pull this off, it wasn't just the aliens they needed to worry about. It was each other. And that, Rigel thought with a dark chuckle, would be the trickiest part of all. Rigel Vance lay on the uncomfortable excuse of a bed, staring at the ceiling, a masterpiece of institutional gray, and wondered what had happened to all that promise he'd once held. Maybe it had gotten sucked out into the vacuum of space along with his last bit of hope. Well, another day, another existential crisis. A loud clang shattered his musings, followed by a second one. Either Bastion was falling apart or some idiot was trying to break into the snack machine again. He was betting on the latter. Vance, came a voice, this time belonging to Marin Thorne, the closest thing Bastion had to a tactician. She slipped in like a shadow, her presence more reassuring than he'd ever admit. Marin had the kind of sharp mind that could cut through the crap faster than a laser scalpel through butter, if butter were a thing they still had on Bastion. Marin, Rigel greeted, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. To what do I owe the pleasure? Come to remind me of all the ways I'm screwed? Thought I'd check in on your little rebellion, she replied, smirking with the kind of amusement usually reserved for watching a monkey try to solve a Rubik's Cube. Yeah, well, we're still in the planning phase, Rigel said, spreading his hands wide as if to encompass the grand scale of their operation. Currently working on the whole, not becoming digital zombies thing. Good luck with that, Marin said dryly. Management's got a new toy, the gravity control systems. Word is, they're tweaking it to help with the digitization process. Rigel's eyebrows shot up. Gravity controls? Why didn't I think of that? He chuckled to himself. That's like using a wrecking ball to hang a picture. Effective, but messy as hell. Marin nodded, her expression serious now. We can use that, you know. If they've messed with the controls, there's bound to be weaknesses. We just need someone who can exploit them. Which is where I come in, I suppose, Rigel said, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like a lead blanket. Pretty much, Marin confirmed, glancing at the door. Meet me in the common room later. There's someone you should talk to. Oh, more friends? Rigel asked. And here I thought my social calendar was full. Marin rolled her eyes but couldn't hide a small smile as she exited, leaving Rigel to ponder the potential for chaos. When Rigel arrived at the common room, it was its usual blend of bleak and bustling. Prisoners milled about, some engaged in games of chance, others in heated debates about who had the best escape plan, a futile discussion if there ever was one. Marin was already there, speaking with a wiry figure hunched over a table littered with wires and what could optimistically be called electronics. Meet Alaric, Marin said when Rigel approached. The best hacker this side of the asteroid belt. Alaric looked up, offering Rigel a grin that said he'd seen one too many conspiracy theories. His fingers danced over a makeshift keyboard with a speed that suggested he'd never met a security system he couldn't charm. Vance, Alaric said, his voice a rapid staccato. Heard about your little war against the tentacled powers that be. War's a bit strong, Rigel replied, grabbing a seat. More like an unauthorized elective in creative freedom. Right, of course. Marin tells me you're looking to turn the gravity system against them, Alaric said, eyes glimmering with the kind of reckless enthusiasm Rigel both admired and feared. That's the idea, Rigel agreed. Problem is, I'm not even sure where to start. I might have a workaround, Alaric said with the air of someone handing over blueprints to a Death Star. We could access the systems during their maintenance cycle. It's risky, but if we time it right, we could throw a wrench in their whole operation. And by wrench, you mean massive gravity failure? Rigel asked, already liking the sound of a plan that involved screwing over their captors. Exactly, Alaric replied, nodding eagerly. But we need a way to get past their security protocols. Leave that to me, Marin interjected, looking between them. I know a few people who owe me favors. Roughing up a few guards won't be out of the question. Rigel glanced at her, impressed despite himself. I knew there was a reason I kept you around. Marin smirked. Flattery will get you everywhere, Vance. As they hashed out the details, Rigel felt a cautious optimism spread through him, a dangerous feeling in their line of work, but one he couldn't quite shake. There was a chance, slim as it might be, that they could pull this off. They spent the next few hours drawing up plans, arguing over strategies, and generally acting like a bunch of misfit soldiers getting ready for a battle they couldn't afford to lose. Later, as Rigel lay on his bunk, staring once more at the ceiling, he couldn't help but laugh. Here they were. A bunch of downtrodden rejects plotting to overthrow an alien overlord with nothing but wits and a handful of half-baked plans. Vance, Jake's voice came from the adjoining cell, low and curious. You serious about all this? The fight, I mean. As serious as I can be about something that involves us being thrown into space soup, Jake, Rigel replied, rolling onto his side. Why, you having second thoughts? Nah, Jake said after a pause. Just checking if I need to start digging an escape tunnel. Rigel chuckled. Save your energy. If this works, we won't need to tunnel out. We'll just make them wish they'd never picked this floating tin can as their test site. Silence fell between them, comfortable and full of unspoken agreements. They both knew what was at stake and what little chance they had. But in a way, that was the best part. In Bastion, with nothing left to lose, they had everything to gain. The next few days passed in a blur of secret meetings and whispered conversations. Rigel and his growing band of rebels worked tirelessly, chipping away at the monolithic plan the aliens had in store for them. They gathered tools, hacked into systems, and bribed guards with contraband so enticing it would have made a saint weep. Alaric's fingers flew across keyboards, bypassing firewalls like they were made of wet tissue paper. Marin kept everyone in line, her tactical mind a reassuring constant amid the chaos. Rigel found himself at the heart of it all, the reluctant leader of a rebellion he hadn't asked for but couldn't turn away from. Each step was a dance on the edge of a knife, but somehow they kept moving forward. Their plan, as harebrained as it seemed, slowly began to take shape. The maintenance cycle for the gravity controls was set to begin soon, and with it, their chance to strike a blow for freedom, or at least not being turned into alien screensavers. As the day of reckoning approached, Rigel found himself once again with Marin and Alaric in the common room, a map of Bastion spread out before them like a declaration of intent. "This is it," Alaric said, jabbing a finger at the schematic. "We hit them here, during the cycle shift. I'll disable the alarms, but you guys will need to get past the guards." "Leave that to me," Marin assured, her eyes gleaming with a determination that could melt steel beams. "We'll clear the way, and if it all goes south?" Rigel asked, resigning himself to the worst-case scenario. "Then we go out with a bang," Marin replied, her voice laced with a grim humor that matched his own. "Better than dying pixelated and forgotten." Rigel nodded, feeling the weight of the coming hours pressing down on him like the ghost of a future he desperately wanted to avoid. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a shot. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying, a concoction of fear and hope that wrapped around him like an old, comforting coat. "All right," Rigel said finally, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. "Let's do this." It was time to show the galaxy what a bunch of human rejects could do. Time to prove that no matter the odds, no matter the stakes, there was always a chance for redemption, even for the damned. And Rigel, with his ragtag band of rebels, was going to make sure they took it. Even if it killed them. The chaos started with a flicker, a quick, disorienting shift in the artificial gravity that sent trays of gray, gelatinous breakfast slop flying through the air. Nothing says, "Good morning," quite like getting slapped in the face by your own vomit-inducing breakfast. Rigel Vance barely dodged a piece of airborne toast as he staggered into the common room, the usual buzz of hopelessness now cranked up to manic confusion. Prisoners scrambled to keep their footing, some managing better than others. One particularly unlucky soul somersaulted spectacularly into a wall, proving that gravity was still a cruel mistress, even when malfunctioning. "Looks like Exel Tors decided to play with his new toy," Rigel muttered, sidestepping a puddle of spilled coffee that someone would have killed for 2 weeks ago. Always nice when the squid decides to speed up the inevitable. Marin Thorne, her usual poise slightly rattled, was already there, barking orders like a drill sergeant on a caffeine high. "Get yourselves together, people," she snapped, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "This isn't a dance-off, it's a malfunction." "That's one way to describe it," Rigel said, joining her. "Though I'd say, complete clusterfuck, has a nice ring to it as well." She shot him a look that could melt Durasteel. "You've got a plan for this, right?" "Plans are a bit of a luxury right now," Rigel replied, rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly. "I'm more of a make-it-up-as-you-go kind of guy." The sudden shift in gravity was unsettling, the kind of thing that made you question not just your physical orientation but your entire life's choices. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Rigel entertained the wild idea that maybe they were all part of some giant cosmic reality show, where the prize was not dying in any uniquely creative ways. Alaric appeared, having somehow managed to gather his tech gear without losing more than a few screws in the chaos. "You guys feel that?" he asked, his voice pitched with a mixture of excitement and nerves, as if the universe had finally handed him the adrenaline rush he'd been craving. "No, Alaric, we're just pretending to walk on water for fun," Rigel replied dryly. "What's the deal?" "Exel Tors accelerated the trials," Alaric said, eyes wide with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested he was one minor catastrophe away from a permanent vacation in the loony bin. "They're pushing the digitization faster than expected, which means their systems are working overtime. Might be an opportunity for us." "Great," Rigel said, "we get to exploit alien incompetence." Just like every other Monday, the group had gathered in a small corner of the chaos-infested common room, their heads bent together like a coven of witches plotting their next spell. Or in their case, the ruin of an alien overlord day. "What's Exel Tor thinking, speeding up the process?" "Reckless much?" Marin asked, voice low but edged with steel. "Probably trying to impress the Proxian board of directors," Rigel guessed. "Or maybe they just like watching us scramble like ants under a magnifying glass." "Either way, if they're rushing, they're making mistakes," Alaric pointed out. "And mistakes are where we get our chance to strike." "Right," Rigel said, glancing around. The room was a symphony of chaos. Prisoners trying to salvage meals, guards barking orders, the ever-present hum of impending doom. "We just need to keep our heads on straight and pretend we're supposed to be here." "Easier said than done," Marin admitted, eyes scanning the room for any signs of unwanted attention. People are getting antsy. If we don't move soon, there might not be a later. Okay. Team meeting, Rigel declared, waving them closer like they were conspiring to cheat at a high-stakes poker game. We need to keep this under wraps. Alaric, what do you need to get into the gravity control system? A miracle and a stiff drink? Alaric suggested, grinning. But I'll settle for a distraction. I need someone to keep the guards busy while I work my magic. Rigel nodded, taking stock of their motley crew. Marin, think you can handle that? Please, she scoffed, rolling her eyes. I've been distracting men since I was 12. Guards won't know what hit them. Good. And while you're charming the pants off them, I'll be making sure no one else tries to mess up our plans, Rigel added. They broke the huddle, each knowing their part in the imminent chaos as well as if it were their own suicide mission. Rigel felt that familiar twinge of trepidation, a gut-level reminder that every step they took was one closer to either triumph or disaster. The next few hours were a blur of covert operations and whispered plans. Rigel moved through Bastion like a shadow, slipping past guards and navigating the corridors with a practiced ease that came from years of living on the edge of survival. Exel Tor, the squid-headed overlord himself, loomed large in their thoughts, a constant reminder that failure meant more than just a slap on the wrist. It meant becoming part of whatever twisted science project the Proxians had in mind. Rigel couldn't help but picture Exel Tor with an oversized monocle, critiquing prisoner data like a snooty art critic assessing a finger painting. Data integrity remains paramount, Exel Tor had once intoned in a briefing, tendrils twitching with self-important gravity. Rigel liked to imagine the aliens' version of integrity involved a lot of tentacles and minimal ethical considerations. Their ragtag band of rebels operated under the radar, threading through Bastion with the precision of a well-oiled machine. The kind of machine that might fall apart at any moment but was holding together by sheer willpower and duct tape. In the control room, Alaric was a whirlwind of frenetic energy, his fingers dancing over keys and screens like a virtuoso pianist on a caffeine bender. Rigel stood sentinel, keeping an eye on the door in case the wrong kind of company decided to stop by. Got it, Alaric exclaimed, triumphantly punching the air. I'm in the system. Great, Rigel replied, casting a wary glance down the corridor. Now do your thing before someone comes in here and decides to make us permanent residents of an alien screensaver. The hacker's hands moved with practiced ease, his face a picture of concentration as he tapped into the gravity control systems. Rigel's heart thudded in his chest, anticipation mingling with a healthy dose of dread. Almost there, Alaric muttered, eyes flicking between screens faster than a pinball. Just need to bypass this last. Hey, what are you two doing here? A voice barked, and Rigel whipped around to see a guard looming in the doorway, suspicion etched across his face like a bad case of acne. Would you believe we're here for the ambiance? Rigel quipped, trying to smile as disarmingly as possible. Last I checked, prisoners weren't allowed in the control rooms, the guard said, his hand moving towards the comm unit on his belt. Time to improvise. Rigel lunged, aiming for the element of surprise. It wasn't a clean hit, more of a scramble and a mess of limbs, but it worked. The guard went down with a grunt, Rigel pinning him with his weight. Alaric, how's it going over there? Rigel called, struggling to keep the guard subdued. Just a sec, Alaric replied, unfazed by the scuffle. And, done, we've got a window before they notice anything's amiss. Perfect, Rigel said, giving the guard a final shove to ensure he stayed down before scrambling to his feet. Now let's get out of here before he wakes up and decides to throw a party. They bolted from the room, adrenaline propelling them through Bastion's corridors. The entire facility seemed to hum with a frenetic energy, as if the very walls were aware of the rebellion brewing within. Marin met them midway, her expression one of grim satisfaction. Guards are busy dealing with a riot in Sector 7, she reported, a wicked grin flashing across her face. Alaric, you're a wizard. More like a very tired magician, Alaric replied, his voice laced with weariness. But thanks. We've got the gravity controls on our side for now, Rigel said, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. But Exel Tor won't stay oblivious for long. We need to keep moving. Their steps were hurried, their movements a synchronized dance of desperation and hope. Rigel felt a strange camaraderie with his fellow prisoners, a shared understanding that they were in this together, whether they liked it or not. Back at the hastily established hideout, Rigel and his crew gathered once more, their faces etched with the strain of the past few hours. It was a moment suspended in uncertainty, the calm before the storm they knew was coming. "Thanks to our efforts, we've got Exceltor's attention," Marin said, her voice steady but edged with tension. "He's ramped up security across Bastion. We've rattled the cage, and now the big, scary beast wants to make an example out of us." Rigel nodded, a sense of resolve taking hold. "Let him try. We've come this far, and we're not backing down now." "It's not just Exceltor we need to worry about," Alaric interjected, his tone grave. "The Proxians will be sending reinforcements. We're a thorn in their side, and they're not going to let us fester." "Then we'll have to be ready," Rigel said, feeling the weight of their situation settle over him like a second skin. "We've got the gravity controls in our favor for now, so let's use that to our advantage. We can turn Bastion into a fortress. Or at least a very well-defended shack," Marin added, her grin returning despite the gravity of the moment. "Either way, we've got a fighting chance," Rigel said, "and if we fail, at least we'll go down swinging." It wasn't much, but in Bastion, where hope was as scarce as privacy, it was enough. They would face whatever came next with grit, determination, and a healthy disregard for authority. Because in the end, they were more than just prisoners. They were survivors, rebels, and, above all, human. And in this grim, uncaring universe, that counted for something. Rigel Vance was getting tired of dodging breakfast. He'd always thought the phrase, food fight, was more of a metaphor than a daily life experience. But here he was, ducking what appeared to be a stale piece of toast spiraling through the air like a deadly frisbee. The toast ricocheted off the walls of the common room, as yet another gravity lapse turned lunch into a zero-G circus. "Hey, Rigel, you here for the scrambled eggs or the floor show?" shouted Marin, her voice cutting through the chaos like a well-aimed shiv. "More like trying to avoid becoming toast myself," Rigel shot back, half smirking despite himself. Being trapped in an orbital prison like Bastion had its downsides, but at least it was never boring. "Speaking of toast," said Alaric, slinking up behind them as the artificial gravity finally stabilized, sending everything thumping back to the ground. "Our little escapade in the control room didn't go unnoticed. Exceltor's minions are sniffing around like a bloodhound with a hangover." "So they've caught the scent, huh?" Marin's eyes narrowed, her mind clearly already racing ahead to the next 10 moves on the chessboard. "More like they're about to crash the entire chess set over our heads," Rigel muttered, watching a guard stalk past, his expression sour enough to curdle milk. Or whatever it was the Proxians drank. Tentacle juice, probably. The atmosphere in Bastion had shifted from merely oppressive to downright suffocating. The air crackled with the kind of tension that usually preceded something messy, like a storm or a bar fight, only with more alien enforcers and fewer opportunities to hide under a table. "All right, team," Rigel said, gathering his ragtag crew of misfits like a general addressing troops before an impossible battle. "Looks like Exceltor and his merry band of tentacle buddies are on to us. We've rattled their cage, and they're not taking it well. Who knew squids could get so touchy?" Alaric grinned, though his eyes darted nervously towards the exit. Rigel continued, "We need a new plan, one that doesn't end with us as Proxian lab rats." "Marin, what's our next move?" Marin leaned in, her voice low and fierce. "We need to hit them where it hurts. The gravity systems are our key, but we can't just fiddle with the controls and hope for the best. We need to take the whole damn system offline." "That's a tall order," Rigel said, scratching his chin thoughtfully. "And by tall, I mean suicidal." "Hey, suicide's just another opportunity for a brave man to change his mind," Alaric chimed in, ever the optimist. "Or for a fool to find a new way to die," Rigel added. "All right, what do we need?" Alaric, already mentally inventorying their meager resources, replied, "Access to the main terminal, some heavy-duty tech, and probably a miracle. But mostly guts. Lots of them." "Guts we've got," Rigel affirmed. "Tech, not so much." "Then we improvise," Marin said, her grin more a baring of teeth than anything resembling warmth. "It's what we do best." "Right," Rigel agreed, feeling that familiar mix of terror and excitement coil in his chest. "Let's move before Exceltor gets his tentacles in a twist." The next phase of their plan kicked off with a calculated act of sabotage. Alaric, ever the opportunist, had managed to finagle a few key components from the less than watchful eyes of Bastion's guards. A loose wire here, a corrupted data packet there, and suddenly the entire station was on high alert, scrambling to fix a system that wasn't exactly broken, but wasn't working right, either. Marin took full advantage of the chaos, her tactical mind weaving through the mayhem with the ease of a dancer in a minefield. "Look at them, running around like headless chickens," Marin commented dryly as they slipped into a restricted zone, dodging the frantic staff. "Only with more tentacles and less sense. You'd think the universe's most advanced species wouldn't fall for the digital equivalent of 'kick me' signs," Rigel said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Never underestimate the power of stupidity," Alaric replied sagely, hacking into the terminal with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. Or optimism, for that matter. The main control room loomed ahead, a hulking monolith of alien technology. It looked like it had been designed by an architect with a fetish for sharp angles and blinding lights. Rigel felt a familiar twist of apprehension. If this plan failed, there wouldn't be a second chance. "Okay, this is it," Marin said, her voice tight with focus. "Alaric, you're up. Just keep them off my back," Alaric responded, already absorbed in manipulating the intricate web of codes and wires. Rigel took up a position by the door, ready to fend off any unwelcome visitors. His heart pounded like a drum solo gone wrong, and he couldn't help but curse the Proxian's penchant for high stakes and low patience. The air was thick with the hum of machinery and the tension of anticipation. Every click of Alaric's keys felt like a countdown to disaster or salvation. Hard to tell which, when your life expectancy was measured in minutes. "Got it," Alaric exclaimed, triumph lighting up his face. "The system's ours." Rigel felt a flicker of triumph. "Then let's—" The door slammed open with a force that rattled the walls, and Rigel spun to see Exultor's enforcers barreling in, weapons raised. Apparently, their little rebellion had struck a nerve. "Greetings, gentlemen," Rigel shouted, more to steal his own nerves than anything else. "Care to join us in a little light treason?" The enforcers didn't reply, at least, not verbally. Their answer came in the form of blaster fire, sizzling past Rigel's ear with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for fireworks or particularly aggressive mosquitoes. "Time to go," Marin barked, grabbing Alaric by the collar and hauling him towards the exit. Rigel was hot on her heels, firing shots over his shoulder as they bolted from the room. The station was in uproar, alarms blaring like a demented symphony as they raced through the corridors. Rigel's lungs burned, his legs ached, but the adrenaline kept him moving. Survival was a powerful motivator, especially when the alternative involved becoming an alien experiment. "You know," Rigel panted, ducking another volley of fire, "I always wanted to be the hero in my own story. Never thought it'd involve so much running." "You'd think a space station would have more places to hide," Alaric gasped, almost tripping over his own feet. "Less hiding, more getting the hell out of here," Marin snapped, leading them down a side passage that offered a fleeting moment of cover. The enforcers were relentless, their pursuit as inevitable as taxes and just as unpleasant. But Rigel and his crew were nothing if not determined. They fought with the desperation of cornered animals, each skirmish a brutal reminder of how close they were to the edge. Then it happened. A stray blast caught one of their number, Kesso, the quiet one, the one who'd been with them since the beginning. He went down with a choked cry, the light in his eyes snuffed out like a candle in a storm. Rigel's heart twisted, a pang of loss that he buried beneath the urgency of the moment. There would be time to mourn later, if there was a later to be had. "Keep moving," Marin shouted, her voice steely with resolve, though Rigel could see the pain in her eyes. They were all feeling it, but stopping wasn't an option. Not now. They barreled through the chaos, each step a struggle against the odds stacked against them. But they were human, damn it, and if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was surviving when the universe wanted them dead. At last, they reached the docking bay, their escape route looming ahead like a beacon in the dark. The path was clear, but their pursuers were close behind, relentless. "Go, go, go," Rigel urged, his voice hoarse with urgency as they sprinted towards their salvation. The docking bay doors loomed open, the ship that would carry them to freedom just beyond. It was battered and worn, a relic of a bygone era, and it was their only hope. But as they made their final dash, Marin suddenly stumbled, her foot catching on the uneven floor. Rigel's heart lurched as he turned back, reaching out instinctively to grab her. "We're not leaving you behind," he vowed, hauling her to her feet. No one got left behind. Not if he could help it. Together, they raced for the ship, Alaric already halfway up the ramp, waving frantically for them to hurry. Behind them, the enforcers were closing in, their footsteps a relentless drumbeat of impending doom. Just as they reached the ship, Rigel felt a searing pain in his side, a blaster shot grazing him with the kind of precision that felt almost personal. But he didn't stop, didn't falter. Pain was just a reminder he was still alive, and he intended to keep it that way. They collapsed into the ship, Alaric slamming the hatch closed behind them. Rigel all but fell into a seat, clutching his side and trying to catch his breath as Marin scrambled to the controls. "Get us out of here, Alaric," Rigel gasped, the weight of their escape settling over him like a heavy blanket. "On it," Alaric replied, fingers flying over the controls with a speed born of necessity. The ship shuddered, engines roaring to life as they blasted away from Bastion. Rigel felt the familiar pull of gravity as they escaped the station's artificial grip, the stars stretching out before them like a promise of freedom and a future. But the cost weighed heavily on them, the absence of their lost comrade a somber reminder of the price they'd paid. Kessa's sacrifice haunted them, a ghost that would linger in their hearts even as they clung to the fragile hope of survival. As the ship sped into the void, Rigel felt a grim determination settle over him. They'd escaped this time, but the fight was far from over. Exel Tor and his ilk would come after them, and they'd need a new plan, a new way to strike back. But for now, they were alive, and as long as they drew breath, they would fight. Because they were human, and in a universe that seemed determined to break them, that was their greatest weapon. "All right, crew," Rigel said, his voice a mix of exhaustion and resolve. "Let's figure out our next move." Marin nodded, her face a study in determination. "We've got a long road ahead. But we'll make them pay, Rigel. For everything." And Alaric, ever the optimist, managed a grin. "After all, it's not like we've got anything better to do." They shared a moment of weary camaraderie, a silent vow that they'd see this through, no matter what. Because in the end, they were more than just prisoners. They were warriors, survivors, and together, they'd find a way to win. Rigel Vance leaned back in his seat, wincing as the blaster wound in his side throbbed like a bad hangover that refused to go away. The ship's cabin was a mess, much like his life, really. Bits of tech strewn everywhere, lights flickering ominously, and the air smelling like someone had left a burnt toast-scented air freshener on full blast. But hey, at least they were free. For now, Alaric was doing his best imitation of a chicken pecking at a keyboard, trying to keep their ride from falling apart mid-flight. "This heap's held together with duct tape and prayers," he muttered, not bothering to hide his exasperation. "Well, start praying harder," Marin replied from the pilot's seat, her fingers dancing across the controls. "Because Exel Tor's not gonna send us a fond farewell card. We need to find a place to hide, regroup." "Hide?" Rigel raised an eyebrow, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread gnawing at his insides. "We're in the middle of space. The only place to hide is behind each other." Dark humor, the last refuge of the damned. "Not entirely true," Alaric interjected, still hammering away at the console. "Rumor has it there's a freighter graveyard nearby. Plenty of places for a ragtag band of misfits like us to vanish." "Graveyard, huh?" Rigel mused. "Sounds about right. We're the Walking Dead anyway." The ship gave a shudder, the kind that suggested something expensive had just broken. Was about to. Alaric cursed under his breath, probably wishing he could be fixing up a speeder bike instead of a spaceship that seemed to be held together with hope and spite. Rigel closed his eyes, trying to think past the pain and fear. The mission to sabotage Exel Tor's digitization program was a bust. Kesso was dead, and Rigel couldn't shake the feeling that he was leading his friends into a losing battle. The Proxians had the technology, the numbers, and a penchant for making humanity's life hell. All they had was a ship that looked like it had survived more wars than Rigel had bad breakups. "Okay," Marin said, breaking the gloom. "Freighter graveyard it is. Better than being sitting ducks out here." Rigel opened his eyes, meeting hers in the dim light of the cabin. "Do we even have a plan anymore? Survive, spite Exel Tor. Repeat," Marin replied, a shadow of her usual confidence flickering in her eyes. "That's all we've got." He nodded, trying to summon his inner leader, the one who wasn't scared out of his mind and questioning every decision he'd ever made. All right, we get to the graveyard, lick our wounds, and figure out how to hit back. We owe Kesso that much. Alaric snorted, managing a smirk despite the tension. I'm sure he'd love knowing we're gonna avenge him from a pile of rusted space junk. Marin rolled her eyes. You got a better idea? Not dying would be a start. As their bickering filled the cabin, Rigel couldn't help but feel a sliver of warmth. This was what they did best, joking in the face of doom. Humanity's greatest weapon. Refusing to quit, no matter how grim things got. The ship juddered again, and Marin swore under her breath. We've got incoming. What now? Rigel groaned, reaching for the nearest console. Exel Tor's welcoming committee? Looks like it. Fast movers. Probably enforcers, Alaric replied, his voice tight. They're not gonna let us waltz outta here. Marin's fingers flew over the controls, the ship responding sluggishly. Hope you're all ready for another dance with death. Always, Rigel said, though it felt more like a lie than ever. The weight of their losses was a leaden anchor in his gut. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows around the cabin. Rigel glanced at the readouts, trying to ignore the little voice whispering that this would be the end. That they'd go down fighting, but go down nonetheless. You really think we've got a shot? He asked, his voice low enough that only Marin could hear. She shrugged, her eyes fixed on the approaching blips on the radar. Does it matter? We're in too deep to turn back now. You know, Rigel said, forcing a grin, I always thought dying would be less sparkly and quieter, Marin agreed, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips despite everything. The enforcers were closing in, and the ship's alarms were blaring like a bad 80s synth track. Perfect, just what they needed. A soundtrack to their impending doom. All right, folks, Marin called, her voice somehow steady amidst the chaos. Hold on to something. Things are about to get bumpy. The first salvo hit them like a punch to the gut, the ship shuddering as Marin threw it into evasive maneuvers. Rigel held on, teeth gritted, every muscle tensed for the next impact. Alaric was a blur of motion, desperately trying to keep the ship from falling apart. One more hit like that, and we're vapor. Thanks for the pep talk, Rigel replied dryly, bracing himself as the ship screamed a protest at the violent maneuvers. Marin's hands were a blur, her face set with grim determination. Hang tight, I'll get us through this. You better, Rigel muttered, more to himself than anyone. They were running on fumes and luck, and both were in short supply. Another jolt, and Rigel's vision swam with stars that weren't outside the window. Alaric, any chance you can sweet-talk our girl into holding together a bit longer? Already singing her lullabies, Alaric shot back, sweat beading on his brow. She's a stubborn old gal. Just like her crew. Despite the gravity of their situation, Rigel let out a breathless laugh. At least we're consistent. The freighter graveyard loomed ahead, an expanse of twisted metal and forgotten dreams. If they could just reach it, maybe they'd have a shot at disappearing. Maybe, Marin was muttering under her breath, a litany of curses and prayers that blurred together. The enforcers were relentless, their fire tearing through space like deadly confetti. Almost there, she gritted out, the ship bucking beneath them as it took another hit. Rigel's grip was white-knuckled, every fiber of his being focused on surviving the next few minutes. If they could just make it to cover, they'd have a fighting chance. Or at least a chance to come up with a new plan that didn't involve dying in space. As they plunged into the graveyard, Marin pulled a maneuver that had Rigel's stomach doing flips. The ship skimmed past a derelict freighter, engines screaming in protest, before diving into the maze of debris. Welcome to the junkyard, Alaric said, voice tight with tension. Rigel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, the immediate threat of annihilation postponed. Find us a good spot to lay low. Marin nodded, weaving them through the twisted metal with the precision of an artist painting a masterpiece. Rigel could almost believe they'd make it out of this alive. Almost. They found a secluded spot between two massive cargo vessels, the hulking shadows providing a temporary haven. Marin powered down the ship, and for a moment, silence reigned, a blessed relief from the chaos outside. Rigel sagged in his seat, the adrenaline crash leaving him feeling like a wrung-out rag. That was a thing. A damned miracle, Alaric corrected, wiping sweat from his brow. Now what? Rigel didn't have an answer, not one that felt real. They were alive, but without a concrete plan, they were just postponing the inevitable. First, we assess the damage, Marin said, slipping into the role of leader with a natural ease that always impressed Rigel. Then we figure out our next move. We can't stay here forever. No shit, Rigel replied, managing a weak grin. But at least we're not dead. Yet. The mood in the cabin was grim, the weight of their losses palpable. Kessa's absence was a raw wound, a stark reminder of the price they'd paid. Rigel closed his eyes, trying to summon the strength to keep going. We'll find a way, he murmured, more to convince himself than anyone else. Marin nodded, her determination a steady flame. We have to. For Kesso. For all of us. Well, Alaric said, breaking the silence with a wry smile, it's not like we've got anything better to do. In the quiet of the ship, surrounded by the ghosts of those who'd come before, Rigel felt a flicker of hope. They were battered, bruised, and barely hanging on, but they were together. And together, maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to turn the tide. As they settled in to lick their wounds and plan their next move, Rigel knew one thing for certain: they weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. The universe could throw whatever it wanted at them. They were human, and they'd fight until their last breath. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and doubt. But they'd face it head on, because in the end, that's what humans did best: survive against all odds. And maybe, just maybe, they'd come out on top after all. The ship's belly was a mess of wires, broken panels, and the distinct smell of space-grade despair. Alaric was knee-deep, or rather shoulder-deep, in all that mess, mumbling curses in a language that would make a sailor cringe. The rest of the crew was scattered around the dim cabin, trying to make sense of their new, not-so-proud home among the cosmic junk. Another day in paradise, Rigel muttered, favoring his injured side as he moved to help. He had the distinct feeling that his body was discovering new ways to betray him every minute. Marin leaned against the hull, eyes on Alaric as if sheer willpower could make him work faster. You're not going to find a magic fix down there, you know. Alaric, sweat beading on his brow, pulled his head out of the mess just long enough to shoot her a look. If I knew how to conjure miracles, I wouldn't be stuck with you lot, now would I? Yeah, well, keep poking around. Maybe you'll find the freighter graveyard's treasure map down there, Rigel chimed in, trying to lighten the mood. The effort was about as successful as a paper umbrella in a meteor shower. Treasure map, huh? Marin snorted, crossing her arms. The only thing we're likely to uncover is more rust and regret. Hey, at least rust doesn't explode, Alaric pointed out. Can't say the same for half the stuff on this tub. A tense silence settled, a stark reminder of how close they were to being scrap metal themselves. The only sound was Alaric's tinkering and the occasional ominous creak from the hull. All right. Enough of this cheerful chat, Rigel said, his tone shifting. We've got to figure out how to hit back. We need something big, something that'll make Exultor think twice about his damn digitization. Alaric paused, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. You know, I've been thinking. The gravity weapon system at Bastion. It's new tech. Rushed job. They never properly ironed out the kinks. Gravity weapons, Marin mused. Right, because fighting ordinary weapons wasn't suicidal enough. Exactly, Alaric said, grinning despite himself. But what if we could turn it against them? Exploit those kinks? Rigel leaned forward, interest piqued. Go on. Well, from what I remember, the system is linked to the digitization process. If we hack it, we could disrupt their whole operation. 'Cause chaos. Chaos we can work with, Marin said, a spark lighting in her eyes. Rigel felt that old flicker of hope rekindle, the one that had kept them alive this long. Okay. So we hijack the gravity system, throw a wrench in their plans, and maybe, just maybe, we get a shot at stopping the digitization. Alaric nodded, more animated now than he'd been in days. It's risky as hell, but it's a shot. Risky's our middle name, Rigel said, his grin widening despite the pain in his side. We were born for bad ideas. Marin looked around at their sorry state, a wry smile on her lips. Well, it's not like we have much to lose, is it? No guts, no glory, Alaric quipped, heading back into the belly of the beast to work his magic. Marin pushed off from the wall, the fire back in her stride. All right, let's get to it. We've got a gravity weapon to hijack. Rigel nodded, feeling the adrenaline surge through his veins. Let's make Exel Tor regret the day he ever messed with us. The plan was set, precarious as it was. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, they had a direction, a way forward that wasn't just running and hiding. It was ambitious, bordering on insane, but it was theirs. Their chance to turn the tide. As Alaric delved deeper into the ship's systems, Rigel and Marin worked on strategizing their approach. The freighter graveyard was a labyrinth of metal husks, each one a potential hiding spot, vantage point, or trap. Think it's possible to send Exel Tor a nice, explosive surprise? Rigel asked, more rhetorically than anything. He was already envisioning the chaos of their plan in action. If we manage this, I'll bake him a cake with a bomb in it myself, Marin replied, cracking her knuckles. Her confidence was infectious, even when it was more bravado than certainty. Alaric emerged, grease smeared across his cheek like war paint. All right, I've got a line on their system. It's like trying to juggle live grenades, but I think I can manage. That's the spirit, Rigel said. Now, let's see if we can't turn this little setback into a full-blown victory parade. Victory parade? More like a last hurrah, Alaric muttered, but there was a glint in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Don't get too excited, Marin said, wagging a finger. We still have to pull this off without getting ourselves vaporized. Always such a killjoy, Rigel teased, earning a smirk from her. They spent the next few hours in a blur of planning and preparation, each of them lost in their thoughts but unified by purpose. The gravity weapon was their ace in the hole, the wild card they had to play perfectly. It was a thin hope, but it was hope. And in the grim reality of their existence, that was as precious as any treasure. Finally, the moment came. Alaric was set to hack the system, his fingers dancing over the console with nervous energy. Rigel and Marin were ready to back him up, weapons primed, eyes sharp. All right. Let's light this candle, Alaric said, the humor in his voice a thin veil over the tension. Do it, Rigel commanded, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders like a familiar old coat. Alaric initiated the hack, and the cabin filled with the rapid-fire clicks and whirs of technology in overdrive. It was an orchestra of chaos, perfectly attuned to their lives. How's it looking? Marin asked, eyes flitting between the screens and the viewport. Like a bad dream, Alaric replied, his focus unwavering. But I think, yes, we're in. Well, I'll be damned, Rigel said, a nervous laugh escaping him. We might actually pull this off. Don't jinx it, Marin warned, though the glint in her eyes betrayed her excitement. The ship shuddered as the gravity weapon system began its malfunction, a symphony of klaxons and flashing lights erupting across Bastion. That's our cue, Rigel said, adrenaline coursing through him like a live wire. This was it. Their chance to hit back, to make Exel Tor pay for every loss, every wound they'd suffered. Let's make some noise, Marin said, her grin equal parts determination and madness. As they sprang into action, Rigel couldn't help but marvel at the sheer insanity of it all. Here they were, a ragtag group of misfits, taking on the might of the Proxians with little more than grit and desperation. But that was humanity's secret weapon, wasn't it? The refusal to lie down and die, to fight against all odds no matter how futile it seemed. Alaric worked furiously, his fingers a blur on the console. The gravity systems of Bastion were in chaos, and from the screams of alarms, the digitization process was stalling, just as they'd hoped. It's working, Alaric gasped, a mixture of disbelief and triumph in his voice. We've got them. Then let's not waste the opportunity, Rigel urged. We hit them hard and fast, before they can recover. Marin nodded, her expression fierce. Time to show them what humans are made of. They moved with purpose, each step a defiance against the overwhelming odds. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and outclassed, but that had never stopped them before. As they executed their plan, chaos erupted across Bastion. The prisoners, sensing the shift in power, began to riot, adding to the confusion. Exel Tor's enforcers scrambled to regain control, caught off guard by the unexpected rebellion. Looks like we've stirred the pot, Alaric commented, a hint of satisfaction in his tone. Just how we like it, Rigel replied, eyes scanning for threats as they advanced. The battle was fierce, each moment a test of their resolve. But for the first time in a long while, they had the upper hand. The Proxians were reeling, their carefully orchestrated plans unraveling before their eyes. Keep pushing, Marin urged, her voice a rallying cry. And push they did, every step fueled by the ghosts of their fallen comrades, every blow a tribute to the resilience of the human spirit. As they fought, Rigel couldn't help but think of Kesso, of the sacrifice they'd made, the price they'd paid to get this far. It was a bittersweet victory, but it was theirs. The tide had turned, if only for a moment. But in that moment, they were free, free to fight, free to hope, free to dream of a future beyond the chains of Bastion. And as they pressed on, Rigel knew one thing for certain: they weren't finished yet. Not by a long shot. The universe might be unforgiving, but so were they. After all, they were human, and that meant never backing down, no matter the odds. In the heart of chaos, they found their strength. And together, they would see it through to the end. The chaotic symphony of alarms blared through the prison corridors, a fitting soundtrack for the mess they'd unleashed. Rigel Vance, a man who'd been on the wrong side of a blaster more times than he'd had showers, gritted his teeth against the pain in his side and kept moving. Nothing like a blaster wound to remind you of your mortality, he thought grimly. Rigel, you look like death warmed over, Marin Thorne said, dodging a low-hanging cable that had decided to impersonate a lethal tripwire. Her words carried that special blend of sarcasm and concern she'd perfected over the years. You sure you can keep up? Keep up? I'll have you know I plan on leading this parade, Rigel shot back, his voice a rasp that spoke of too many late nights and too few triumphs. Besides, if we fail, Exel Tor's gonna make sure we don't get a second chance to screw up. Marin snorted. That's the spirit. Nothing like impending doom to get the blood pumping. Ahead of them, the corridor twisted like a serpent, each turn a potential ambush point. Alaric, the eternal pessimist with a talent for mechanics that bordered on witchcraft, was a few steps ahead, his focus locked on the device in his hands. He was hunched over like he was trying to fold himself into invisibility, though his muttered curses made that impossible. Alaric, you want to keep it down? Rigel whispered harshly. You're gonna bring the whole Proxian army down on us. Relax, Rigel, Alaric replied without looking up, his fingers fluttering over the controls like a pianist at a concerto of chaos. Exel Tor's goons are having a bad day thanks to this little beauty. Hacked their gravity controls so good, they can't tell up from down. Marin leaned in to peek at the device. You sure it's not gonna backfire? Last thing we need is getting caught in 0G with a bunch of grumpy aliens. Wouldn't be the worst thing that's happened today, Alaric said with a shrug. He paused, wiping a streak of grease from his cheek only to smear it with another. But yeah, pretty sure. 90%, maybe 85. Your confidence is terrifying, Rigel deadpanned, glancing around for any sign of trouble. But it'll have to do. Their route took them through the heart of Bastion, where chaos reigned supreme. Prisoners, emboldened by the unexpected disruption, were making a mess the likes of which a janitor's union would have nightmares about. Metal clanged against metal, voices shouted in a dozen languages, and the air held the ripe scent of rebellion. Look at him go, Marin said, her voice loud enough to carry over the din. Makes you proud to be human, doesn't it? Proud? More like bewildered, Rigel replied. But hey, if it keeps Exel Tor's goons busy, I'm not complaining. They moved with purpose, weaving through the chaotic throng like fish swimming against a very rowdy current. Their destination was the control hub, the nerve center of Bastion's gravity systems. If they could reach it and secure their hold, they'd have a fighting chance to turn the tide for good. Alaric, still glued to his device, suddenly stopped, his eyes wide. Whoa, hold up, what is it? Rigel asked, tense and ready for whatever fresh hell awaited. Looks like Exel Tor's boys are trying to override my hack. Sneaky bastards. Give me a sec. Alaric's fingers danced faster, tapping out commands with the urgency of a man defusing a bomb with his shoelaces. Can you stop them? Marin pressed, her hand hovering over her weapon, eyes scanning the tumultuous crowd for threats. Stop them? Hell, I can do better. Give me a minute and I'll send them a nice little surprise, Alaric replied, a wicked grin spreading across his face. Think of it as a gravity grenade. Just don't blow us up in the process, Rigel quipped, earning a glare from Alaric. The tension in the air was palpable, threading itself through every breath and every heartbeat. Seconds stretched into eternities as they waited, the world narrowing to the tiny device in Alaric's hands. Finally, he exhaled, satisfaction written all over his face. Done. That should keep them busy for a while, Alaric announced, tucking the device into his pocket. Let's move before they figure it out. They continued their advance, the clamor of rebellion echoing through the halls behind them. The gravity weapon, their ace in the hole, was now a time bomb waiting to detonate. Rigel could almost taste the potential for catastrophe in the air, and it made him feel alive in a way few things did anymore. As they reached the control hub, the gravity fluctuations grew more erratic, like a toddler playing with a light switch. Each step was a gamble, and not the fun kind. Rigel steadied himself against the wall, his injured side protesting with every movement. All right, this is it, Marin said, checking her weapon one last time. We hit them hard, and we hit them fast. Just like old times, Rigel replied, his voice carrying a hint of nostalgia. Only with more gravity and less chance of survival. They burst into the control room, weapons at the ready. The Proxians inside were in disarray, flailing against the chaos unleashed by Rigel's team. Exultor's enforcers, hulking creatures with more muscle than sense, scrambled to regain control, their confusion a testament to Alaric's handiwork. Surprise, boys, Rigel shouted, firing at the nearest alien, who barely had time to register the threat before crumpling to the floor. Courtesy of humanity's finest. The room erupted into chaos, a ballet of violence with Rigel and his team as the unlikely stars. Alaric dove for the control panel, intent on securing their hold over Bastion's systems. Marin moved with lethal grace, her shots precise and purposeful, each one inching them closer to victory. Amidst the fray, Rigel saw Exultor himself, a towering figure of authority and arrogance, now struggling to maintain his composure as his plans unraveled. The sight brought a savage grin to Rigel's face. There was something deeply satisfying about watching the mighty brought low. Exultor, Rigel called out, his voice cutting through the din. Looks like your little digitization schemes hit a snag. The alien leader turned, his expression a mixture of rage and disbelief. You dare defy me, human? He snarled, his voice resonating with the threat of 1,000 promised punishments. Defy you? Hell, I'm just getting started, Rigel replied, firing a shot that forced Exultor into cover. You should have known better than to mess with us. With the gravity weapon under their control, the Proxians' numerical advantage meant squat. The room became a battleground of shifting forces, as unsecured objects floated and fell chaotically. Amidst the disarray, Alaric was a whirlwind of focus, fingers flying over the controls. Almost got it, he muttered, sweat dripping from his brow. Just need a few more seconds. Seconds we might not have, Marin shot back, taking out another alien with a well-placed shot. We need to wrap this up before they regroup. Working on it, Alaric retorted, the tension in his voice mirroring the gravity fluctuations that rocked the room. With a final flurry of keystrokes, Alaric locked down the system, their control over Bastion's gravity weapon complete. The power shifted in an instant, the tides of battle turning irrevocably in their favor. Got it, Alaric exclaimed triumphantly. Gravity's ours. The effect was immediate. Exultor's forces, already struggling to cope, found themselves at the mercy of their own technology. The gravity weapon responded to Rigel's team like a well-trained pet, shifting the battlefield to their advantage. Now that's what I call a power play, Rigel crowed, his heart pounding with adrenaline and vindication. He watched as the Proxians faltered, their once unshakable confidence crumbling like a house of cards. Let's finish this, Marin said, her gaze locked on Exultor, who was rapidly losing his grip on control and reality. Together, they advanced, pushing the beleaguered Proxians back with relentless precision. The battle was won not just with firepower, but with the indomitable spirit that set humans apart from their alien adversaries. Where the Proxians relied on numbers and technology, Rigel's team wielded creativity and sheer audacity. Exultor, cornered and desperate, made a final stand, his defiance etched into every line of his alien visage. But even his formidable presence couldn't withstand the combined force of Rigel and his team. Give it up, Exultor, Rigel called, his voice carrying the weight of triumph. Your digitization days are over. The alien leader's response was a guttural growl of defiance, but his actions betrayed his defeat. With one last surge of effort, Rigel's team overwhelmed him, securing their victory. As the dust settled, a hush fell over the control room. The chaos of battle faded, replaced by the heavy silence of hard-won peace. Rigel looked around at his team, battered but unbowed, and allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. "We did it," Marin breathed, lowering her weapon. Her eyes met Rigel's, a shared understanding passing between them. This was the culmination of everything they'd fought for. "Against all odds," Alaric added, his voice tinged with disbelief and pride. He leaned against the console, exhaustion catching up with him. "Remind me never to doubt you again, Rigel." Rigel chuckled, a sound that held more relief than humor. "Don't worry, I'll make sure you don't forget." With Exel Tor defeated and the digitization process halted, the threat hanging over Bastion was finally lifted. It was a victory that tasted of blood and sweat, a reminder of the price they'd paid. But it was theirs. A testament to their resilience, to the human spirit that refused to break. As they stood amidst the wreckage of their triumph, battered but alive, Rigel knew that this was just the beginning. The universe was vast and unforgiving, but so were they. They had survived against all odds, and now, they were free to chart their own course among the stars. The aftermath of a battle is a bit like a hangover, noisy, messy, and full of regret. The control room was no different, with broken panels and the bodies of Exel Tor's goons littering the floor like discarded party favors. Rigel leaned against the console, his injured side reminding him that even victory had its price tag. A sharp one, payable in pain and pride. "Well, that was fun," Marin said, holstering her weapon with the kind of satisfaction one gets from finally swatting a particularly annoying fly. "What's next, Captain?" Rigel chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Survive, get out of here, maybe find a planet where the locals don't want to digitize us." "Sounds downright idyllic," Alaric replied, his voice heavy with mock disbelief. "We'll have to watch out for killer flowers and rabid squirrels instead." Marin snorted, giving Alaric a playful shove. "Better than killer aliens with a fetish for turning us into data." Around them, the other prisoners began the slow process of rebuilding, or at least trying to figure out what life without constant fear of digitization might look like. The chaos of the battle had given way to a different kind of chaos, one born of freedom and uncertainty. "Do you think they'll manage?" Alaric asked, nodding towards a group of prisoners trying to jury-rig a communications array from the debris. Rigel shrugged, watching the scene with a mix of skepticism and grudging admiration. "They're humans. They'll manage or die trying." Marin raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "And what about us? What's the plan once we get out of this floating junk pile?" Rigel sighed, a weary smile playing on his lips. "Plan? You've been with me this long and you think I have a plan?" "He's got you there," Alaric chimed in, grinning. "Rigel's plans are more like suggestions. Strong recommendations on a good day." Yeah, laugh it up," Rigel said, waving a hand dismissively. "But seriously, we need to reach the freighter graveyard. It's a long shot, but it might just be our ticket out of this mess." The freighter graveyard, a rumored dumping ground for decommissioned ships, was as good a hiding place as any, assuming it even existed. But in a universe of ruthless regimes and resourceful rebels, sometimes a rumor was all you had. "And if it doesn't exist?" Alaric asked, ever the pessimist. "Then we improvise," Rigel replied, with a shrug that sent a jolt of pain through his side. "Same as we always do." Marin placed a hand on Rigel's shoulder, her expression softening. "You're not alone, you know. We'll figure it out, together." Rigel met her gaze, a moment of understanding passing between them. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about something more. Something like hope, if you squinted hard enough. "All right," Rigel said, squaring his shoulders. "Let's see what else needs fixing before we make our grand escape." They moved through the control room, offering help where they could and lending their expertise to those still reeling from the battle. Some prisoners wore expressions of dazed disbelief, as if they couldn't quite believe their luck. Others wore grim determination, the realization that their freedom was theirs to shape and defend. "Feels like we're in a bad motivational poster," Alaric muttered. "You know, teamwork makes the dream work, and all that." Marin laughed, shaking her head. "Yeah, except we didn't choose the team, and the dream involves staying alive." Rigel watched them, the banter a comforting distraction from the weight of leadership. Despite everything, this ragtag group of outcasts had pulled off the unthinkable. They'd stood against Exel Tor and won. It was a testament, not to their individual strengths, but to their combined resilience. And now, in this brief lull, there was a chance to reflect. to consider the broader implications of what they'd achieved. Their victory wasn't just a fluke, it was a spark. One that could catch fire across the stars, uniting others who were tired of living in fear. "Hey, Rigel," Marin called, interrupting his musings. "You all right?" He blinked, dragging his thoughts back to the present. "Yeah, just thinking." "Careful," Alaric quipped. "Thinking leads to planning, and we know how well that goes." Rigel chuckled, shaking his head. "Point taken. But seriously, this could be something bigger than just us. Something that gives everyone out there a reason to fight back." "Optimism," Marin said with a mock gasp. "I hardly recognize you." "Call it what you want," Rigel replied with a shrug. "But if a bunch of misfits like us can take down the great Exultor, maybe there's hope for the rest." "Well, aren't we just the bleeding heart of the universe?" Alaric said with a wry grin. "But I suppose if we're going to make a name for ourselves, it might as well be as heroes." "Heroes?" Marin asked, arching an eyebrow. "That's pushing it. Survivors, maybe." Rigel nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "Survivors will do just fine." As they worked, the sense of camaraderie grew, threads of unity weaving between the prisoners who had once been little more than strangers sharing a cell block. There was a shared understanding that their freedom came with responsibility, a need to stand together against whatever new threats might emerge. The thought was both daunting and exhilarating. For the first time in longer than he cared to remember, Rigel felt a flicker of something he'd thought long dead: hope. Not the naive, starry-eyed kind, but the gritty, hard-won variety that came from defying the odds and living to tell the tale. "Rigel," Marin said, drawing his attention back. "Got a minute?" He nodded, following her to a quieter corner of the control room. "What's up?" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "About earlier, you were right. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about all of us." Rigel offered a small, half-smile. "Funny how that works, isn't it? You start out just trying to survive, and next thing you know, you're leading a revolution." "Don't get ahead of yourself," she teased, her smile genuine. "But yeah, it's something. Something worth fighting for." Her words echoed in his mind, a reminder that their battle wasn't just one of blasters and brute force. It was about changing the narrative, about proving that humanity wasn't just a collection of disparate souls, but a force to be reckoned with. As the hours passed, they continued to assist with repairs, their hands busy and their minds focused on the next steps. The freighter graveyard was their immediate goal, but beyond that lay a universe of possibilities and challenges. "We'll need to be careful," Rigel said, addressing his team as they regrouped. "Exultor might be down, but his allies won't take this lying down." "Let him come," Alaric replied, his tone defiant. "We've got gravity on our side. Literally. Let's not get cocky," Marin warned. "We've done enough tempting of fate for one lifetime." They nodded, understanding that while they had won a significant victory, the road ahead was fraught with danger. But there was no turning back now. Not after everything they'd been through, everything they'd sacrificed. As they prepared to depart, Rigel took one last look around the control room, committing the scene to memory. It was a place of endings and beginnings, where they'd carved their own path in defiance of fate. "Ready?" Marin asked, her voice steady and sure. He nodded, feeling the weight of her question. "Ready." Together, they made their way through the corridors, the sounds of rebuilding echoing behind them like a promise. The freighter graveyard awaited, a chance for a new beginning, or a swift end, depending on their luck. But that was the thing about luck. It favored the bold, the reckless, and the refuse-to-quit types. Rigel and his team fit the bill perfectly, and with each step, they carried the hope of a brighter future, one built on the foundations of their hard-won freedom. As they approached the ship's belly, where their battered vessel awaited, Rigel couldn't help but feel a flicker of anticipation. This was the start of something new, something they could shape as they saw fit. "All aboard the cosmic junk heap," Alaric announced with a flourish, gesturing at their ship. "Next stop. Wherever the hell we want." Marin grinned, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I call shotgun." Rigel followed, a wry smile on his lips. "I suppose that makes me the captain. Everyone hold on tight." With that, they boarded the ship, ready to chart a course through the stars. Their victory over Exultor was just the beginning, a testament to their resilience and determination. And as they left Bastion behind, Rigel knew they had something more than just survival on their side. They had each other, and that was enough to take on the universe.